Whether you're an NBA team or really anything else in life, having an abundance of wealth, an abundance of assets is a great position to be in. Specifically for the NBA, it's also a fairly not even unique, probably isn't the best word, but it's an important situation where you need to make the best decisions, because you can either, if you mismanage your assets, and this could be a life thing as well, if you mismanage your assets, you could screw yourself out of your great position. If you manage your assets properly, then you can create a dynasty. Houston is kind of at a crossroads right now, I think. They're in a great position, but we've seen a number of teams be in similar positions in recent seasons. We've seen some of them do a good job of either trading the right players or extending the right players, knowing when to just let the team develop versus when to accelerate the timeline forward, who to hold on to, who to move. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered. I'm going to give my thoughts on how I would answer these questions, and how the Rockets could opt to answer them in different ways, and how that could impact the dynasty value of certain players on the roster, or guys that they could acquire to make this roster better, and how that could change things for this team. All in all, it is a great position to be in, but I just wanted to remind you guys before we talk about that, the Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all of your sports betting action. We've got baseball season, we've got the NHL playoffs, and of course, the NBA playoffs are still going on. And boy, are these games getting good. We saw OKC escape Minnesota, take a 3-1 lead in the series. This is the ad read, so maybe not the best time to just complain about the ending, but the NBA definitely needs to find a solution that avoids these phenomenal games just ending in let's foul and it turns into a free throw shootout. Because there's nothing worse than a super exciting game coming down to who hits their free throws. It's a high pressure situation for the players, sure, but it's not fun. Anyways, another rant for another time. But tonight we have the Pacers and the Knicks playing Game 4. So far, a home team has not won in this series, but the Pacers are still favored by 2.5. If you're interested in getting in on the action for that one, BetOnline is a great place to do that. They have the largest selection of odds on everything from the MLB to the NHL to UFC, and they remain the number one online source for all your sports wagering info. BetOnline, the game starts here. Okay, as I said, Houston Rockets. This is probably how I would build a team in 2K, with having a number of different young players with different strengths and weaknesses, plenty of upside, extra picks. It's exactly how I build a team. It's exactly how I try and build my dynasty teams as well. If you're just looking at these players just as individuals, which is what we do in fantasy, it's a great situation. You just let these guys develop, but things work differently in the NBA. You have contracts to think about. You have team fit to think about. These players age, and some of them get better with age. Some of them don't progress the way you want them to. None of these guys are to the point where we're worried about them falling off a cliff in production. Well, maybe a guy like a Fred VanVleet is on the older side, but he's not tremendously so old that he's like last season or two. And then you also have cap space to think about. Yes, these guys want to get paid, and sure, you have to figure out the right amount to pay them, but you also have to pay them the right amount within what you have to work with, because these players may be deserving of more money, but you don't have the money to pay them that. It's an interesting situation the Rockets are in. We've seen other teams be in similar situations in recent years where they have all of these players that are either for top 10 picks, former lottery picks, and some of them have already panned out. Some of them we're still trying to figure it out. Some of them just haven't worked out super well. Houston doesn't have many of those guys in that roster. To their credit, they've been drafting very well. Probably not perfectly, but I don't think there's anybody on there that is just an absolute bust and just like looking back like, wow, why did they pick them? But you see that with other teams. I mean, I think a few that come to mind, Orlando's had so many lottery picks over the last, I don't even know, 8 years. And they finally have put together a very solid team, but only a few of those guys are surefire part of the future guys. We have Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs are 100% part of the future, and then a number of other lottery picks that are you're not exactly sure. And some of those guys held more value at one time, and had they traded them, maybe this team would be more dominant than it is. Atlanta had a number of players, and Atlanta is probably the example of for Houston to say, okay, this is what we don't want to do, because they had John Collins, and then they drafted Trey Young. They had Kevin Herter. Then they went Cam Reddish and DeAndre Hunter, both in the top 10. Then Onyeka Okongwu. And it was in a really good spot where you're like, okay, you see the vision. You got all these guys within a few seasons, and now you just need to develop them well. They waited too long on basically everybody, and they traded away all those guys except for they still have Trey Young, still have Onyeka Okongwu. But the other four they traded away for pennies on the dollar compared to other points of their production. And if you compare that to what Houston has now, you see the upside with players like Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Cam Whitmore. Like, you see the vision with them. You see the vision as well with guys like Reed Shepard, Tari Eason, and then Amen Thompson and Alperen Şengün. I don't even want to say you don't see the vision, you see what's happening before your eyes. Like, you see how good those guys are. And those aren't the types of players that I'm talking about. I'm talking more about the other guys, where you're like, okay, the idea of Jalen Green is phenomenal. What we've seen so far sometimes is phenomenal. Other times it's not. So what do you do with that? Well, there's a few options that Houston has. They can continue to just say, we'll just stick with what we got. We will let these guys develop and make those decisions later on. You can be more active about it and trade some of them in a consolidation package to bring in more win now talent and still keep a few of those guys. And there's actually probably just a few different ways to do that. And then just try and say, okay, if we bring in players to help us win now, continue to develop around, say, Amen Thompson, Alperen Şengün, one or two other guys that you've accumulated over the last couple of years. And then those guys are still the future, so you can win now and in the future. Hopefully not sacrificing too much of your future draft capital while doing that. Or you can totally cash in and say, hey, we have all these guys. We'll keep a couple of them, but we'll trade everyone else, trade all of our picks, and we'll just stack the roster right now. And you see that sometimes in dynasty leagues. You don't see it quite as often in the NBA. And it's just a lot of times, I guess, if you see that in the dynasty league, you know that manager is probably going to quit in 2 seasons. We'll try and win some rings, and then we'll leave the league and try something else. We don't like those guys. It's kind of annoying when people do that. You could see an older owner that's like, not in like a morbid way, but like maybe doesn't have as much time as a younger owner and wants to be more win now. I mean, Pat Riley's 80. And this is, again, not trying to be morbid or anything like that, but he's 80. So like, you're probably not going to see him want to be super patient through a rebuild. Don't know how that was not a plan. Did not plan to get on that topic at all, but it just happened that way. Basically trying to lay out a few different paths for Houston. Keep in mind, they also have the number 10 pick in the draft, which they got from Phoenix. So they also have pick 59 along with that. And then looking ahead, they don't have their own 2026 first. They don't have their own 2027 first. Or excuse me, they do, and they have the right to swap it with Brooklyn as well. They have Phoenix's first in 2027. They have their own 2028 pick. They will, in 2029, they're actually set up fairly well. They'll get the 2 most favorable picks between their pick, Dallas's pick, and Phoenix's pick, and then Brooklyn will get the least favorable. So if, say, Dallas is more set up now that they have Cooper Flag, but that could pretty easily be if Phoenix, if they're not able to kind of turn things around, that could be another lottery pick there. And they have their own pick, 2030, 2031. So 2026 is the year that they don't have their own first, and it'll be traded away in a random pick swap. Don't know exactly who it'll go to. Brooklyn, OKC, someone. Um, but for the most part, they have their own picks and they have a couple extra picks, some that could be pretty valuable. And if we're looking at this roster, they have a team option for Fred VanVleet next season, which is a fairly interesting one because he's set to be paid $45 million. Do they accept that and then trade him with picks and young guys to bring in a superstar? Do they just full on say, yeah, sorry, we're not going to pay you that much, but we'd love to keep you. We'll decline that option and we'll figure out a new contract to pay you longer, but we're not going to pay you $45 million. Or do they just pick it up and say, hey, we value you. We want you here for another season and we'll figure it out the next year. Who knows? Aaron Holiday also has a team option, and then the unrestricted free agent Steven Adams, who was very valuable for them in that first round series, brings a pretty unique dynamic that Alperen Şengün doesn't. So playing them together or just having Steven Adams on the floor at all was helpful. Jeff Green and Jayshawn Tate also unrestricted free agents, and then a couple of restricted free agents that weren't even part of the rotation. For the most part, their young core is under contract, and that's Jalen Green's contract is set to is like his extension. He'll make $33 million. That'll kick in next season. Dylan Brooks is still under contract. We have Reed Shepherd, Jabari Smith, Amen Thompson. Alperen Şengün's extension will also kick in, so he'll be making just under $34 million. Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore. And again, the number 10 pick. So you have all these assets, and you can say, okay, we'll just let everyone develop, and in 2 years, maybe even next season, everybody's developed enough that we have this 10-man rotation we're deeper than basically everyone else in the league. I mean, the Thunder are probably the only other team that really compare with their depth. Or you can consolidate a little bit, maybe trade some of these younger guys for players or like a superstar, and then add more veteran players that will help win now. They'll have options. But they definitely need to figure out how they feel about certain players. And I think that's what we'll try and get into here in a minute. But just trying to like piece together rumors or reports, no inside information here, but it seems like Giannis isn't necessarily on the table. I guess we'll figure that out probably closer to the draft or after that. But they definitely can put together one of the strongest packages for Giannis. It's just, does Giannis have any interest in being in the Western Conference when you can stay in the East and maybe be a little bit more competitive, have a better chance to win a championship because you're not playing these Western Conference teams until the NBA Finals. You're not having to beat multiple Western Conference teams. Is Kevin Durant a more realistic option? Do you trade one or two of these younger guys, and that's enough to bring in Kevin Durant, enough for Houston to part with them? So if, say it's, for example, a guy like Jalen Green because his contract extension, and I haven't gone to check to see if there's any like can't trade because of the cap coming in or because of the new contract or anything like that. Don't think that would be the case. I haven't verified, but it could be like a guy like a Jalen Green plus another younger player like a Cam Whitmore, a pick, maybe someone else to match a contract like a Jock Landale, something like that, to bring in a guy like Kevin Durant. Now, Jalen Green is an upside swing for Houston. He can learn from two players that you probably want to compare him to if he's at his peak, and that's Devin Booker and Bradley Beal. An interesting fit there, but a young player they can take an outside swing on. They get a pick or two. Cam Whitmore also an exciting young piece, but maybe that's a realistic option because then you have quite a lineup and you have this proven scorer that in the postseason, you need a bucket. You're down 4 with 45 seconds left. Like you need to score and then get a stop and score again. And Kevin Durant is proven he can be that guy. Like you have other players that can score, but Kevin Durant is that guy that can just go do his own thing. So I think that makes a lot of sense for Houston. All right, now we can get into some of the specifics for some of these guys. Talk about maybe some of the paths that they can take. We'll talk about the first guy because he's pretty intriguing. Probably, I think polarizing is a fair word, and that is Jalen Green. 21 points per game, 4.6 rebounds, 3.4 assists. I think it's definitely just fair to just have mixed opinions about him, or just kind of be super unsure because I think it's pretty easy to see the vision of who he can be, and I think what his archetype is, the idea of him is fairly valuable. Just a player that can just go create his own shot, um, hit threes, hit contested shots, get to the rim, athletic. Um, but what's actually happened hasn't been phenomenal. He hit 2.9 threes per game this year, shot 42.3% from the floor. Not phenomenal for fantasy basketball, not phenomenal as what they draft him to be. Because he went number 2 overall, went right before Evan Mobley, went before Scotty Barnes, went before Franz Wagner. A lot of those players that there's other players in that draft class. Heck, he went before Alperen Şengün, obviously. And so the but the idea is a player that can potentially lead the league in scoring, create his own shot, and that is valuable in today's NBA. But Jalen Green just hasn't been able to do that consistently. There's been some stretches, and everybody knows about it. Jalen Green will have these stretches where you're like, for 2 or 3 weeks, oh, okay, this is who he is. This is the best player in the league, and it usually works out well for fantasy basketball as well because it'll be in category leagues, and you'll see, oh, past 2 weeks, Jalen Green top 5, and it's like, what? Oh, he's averaging 35 and hitting 6 threes per game or something ridiculous like that. Something that's just the definition of unsustainable. You don't know when it's going to stop, but at some point it will. And then he has those stretches where just can't get anything going. So it's very polarizing because you see the vision, but I'm not a believer that Jalen Green is going to be a very consistent 25-point per game scorer or anything like that. I think it's going to continue to be these ups and downs. He is still young, so that gives you a little bit of optimism there that maybe by the time he is 25 or 26, it can happen more consistently. But Houston was the number 2 seed in the West this year. They're ready to win now. And it's a very young course, so they can still get better through trades or just these guys developing. He's played 82 games the last 2 seasons, and that's also very encouraging. Each of the last 2 seasons hasn't missed a game. It's great. But Houston's in a difficult spot with him because, I mean, not that it's time sensitive, like they have to make a decision this summer, no matter what. Like they don't have to do that, but I think it's a good opportunity to with certain players potentially available for trade. The upside of Jalen Green is tremendous. The downside is not great. Houston's also a really good defensive team. Jalen Green's not a phenomenal defensive player. Personally, I think that the best option for Houston is to trade Jalen Green in a move that brings back someone that's more ready to win now. I am not a massive believer that Jalen Green is going to be a superstar, but I see the vision. And I think if he's traded somewhere that is less ready to win now, more willing to give him time to develop, that maybe that can happen. I think a change of scenery is a good thing, potentially a good thing. If it doesn't happen, I'm not fully giving up on him. I wouldn't, not banking on him becoming a superstar. So I think for fantasy, that's also the ideal situation is for him to be traded because when Houston, as I said, ready to win now, potentially trade for someone else. But if not, like we see how good Alperen Şengün is, we see how good Thompson is. Jalen Green's going to slowly get pushed down the pecking order as these other players that are developing continue to demand the ball more and more. Jalen Green was a leading scorer this year. Are we confident that if they just run it back, that that's going to happen again next season? Could he take a step? Sure. But if he doesn't take a pretty sizable efficiency step, I'm not confident that Jalen Green's going to lead the team in scoring again. So how do you approach it if he's on your dynasty team? Well, I think that of the players they have, he's probably the most likely to be traded, but that doesn't guarantee anything because maybe every team they try and trade with, there's a reason that he's the most likely to be traded and they're not super interested. That's possible. It's a pretty difficult place to approach in Dynasty because maybe they do trade for Kevin Durant, but the Suns aren't super interested in Jalen Green. They'd rather trade for Jabari Smith and Cam Whitmore and picks. So now Jalen Green is on this team with Fred VanVleet and Ahmed Thompson, Kevin Durant, Alperen Şengün. So what's his role now? He's not the best scorer on the team anymore. He's not the best shot creator on the team anymore. It limits what he can do. Sure, again, he's still young, learning from Kevin Durant, playing alongside Kevin Durant. Not a bad thing for his development. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens this summer. I think the bottom line is we're kind of hoping for a fresh start here. I think it's not the worst thing that happens if he doesn't get moved. It still could work out in Houston, but I think it's more likely to work out in a different scenario that maybe has a little bit more time for him to develop and can put the ball in his hands as much as possible because they're trying to continue his development as opposed to win a championship. We'll see what ends up happening. All right. Moving on. That was Houston's leading scorer last season. We'll go to number 2. That's Alperen Şengün, who was fantastic again this year. And his game is definitely built for fantasy basketball. They call him Baby Jokic. I'm sure you've heard that before. 19.1 points per game, 10.3 rebounds, 4.9 assists. Very well-rounded, big, good playmaker. Also averaged 1.1 steals. Not really doing anything from the three-point line. Not a great free throw shooter. But again, you see the vision here. But honestly, I'm questioning whether this is the best spot for his development. And I don't mean that in a sense of like Houston fans shouldn't want Alperen Şengün. I think they should. They should want him to be there as long as possible. I think he has superstar upside, and he's kind of already. I mean, he made the All-Star game this year. We know what type of player he is, but they haven't truly just ran the offense through him. And I think that maybe his defensive limitations, he's not, again, like I think he's improved, but he's not an elite defender. And there's other players in this team that are. But they haven't just fully ran the offense through him. Could having him in as the featured player in a trade for a superstar. Now, I don't think you trade Alperen Şengün for Kevin Durant. Respectfully to KD, I think the idea of a he'll be 23 in July, 23-year-old Alperen Şengün is a lot more attractive as an asset than Kevin Durant at his age. But I think if Giannis to Houston is a reasonable option, or there is just another superstar that becomes available, I don't think Alperen Şengün should be off the table in a deal. I think that the one player on this team that I just wouldn't part with no matter who's available, and I say no matter who's available, but like if someone that's not going to become available, like Victor Wembanyama became available, then sure, you talk about trading Ahmed Thompson. But I think Ahmed Thompson is the one player on this team that I would say, unless like a top 5 player in the world is available, I'm not really looking to trade him. And you could say, oh, well, like Giannis is a top 5 player in the world, and you're right, now that I'm saying it out loud. But I think if you have the choice, you trade Alperen Şengün before you trade Ahmed Thompson. I think is the point I'm trying to hammer home here, that Ahmed Thompson is the most valuable player on this team. I think the idea of Şengün is super fun. And we've seen this type of center have a lot of success. Yeah, the Baby Jokic comp, but also like a guy like Domantas Sabonis. But I think it's still just the idea of the upside that hasn't fully been there yet. Like if he is traded to a different situation where he is like the hub offensively. Could we see those assists go up? For sure. Played 31 and a half minutes per game this year, 10.3 rebounds is a career high. Could we see him get up to 33, 34 minutes and maybe average more rebounds? Sure. Staying around a steal and a block is phenomenal. 1.1 steals, 0.8 blocks this year. Not expecting too much else. Can he expand his range outside the 3-point line truly? Or is he just going to be kind of like, oh, he takes one a game, doesn't shoot him at a high rate? Like, can he be a 37% 3-point shooter while taking 4 or 5 per game? That would be a huge step for him. Field goal percentage dropped below 50% this year. Could we see that get back up? Because it was a 53.7 the year before. Hopefully, not a great free throw shooter. So there's definitely limitations that make me less confident that he's going to get anywhere near what Jokic and honestly even Sabonis have been able to do. But I would bank on it happening. I just want to see the growth happen, hopefully next year. And in a new scenario, I don't hate that happening. I think the odds of him being traded are astronomically low. And I think it would basically be Giannis becoming available and interested in Houston that would put Şengün on the table here. I think, honestly, and this is nothing that he needs to work on. I think it's just, we just got to hope it happens. And that's that Ime Udoka just says, hey, let's give this guy the ball more and let him kind of orchestrate the offense. Fingers crossed. I mean, there's not really much else to say there other than hopefully they feature him more because he is a stud. Would like to maybe see him shoot more efficiently, but it just kind of a slightly down year in that regard. He can bounce back and be one of the best picks or best value picks in fantasy next year. I guess depending on how early he ends up going. But in Dynasty, you just enjoy the ride. This guy's a stud. I think, again, if we're just being like, what is, even in an unrealistic scenario, what's the best thing for his individual statistical development? I think being traded isn't terrible. Like if he was traded to Milwaukee in a trade for Giannis, I think that would be good for Şengün. Because now it's like there's not much optimism to be had in Milwaukee. But if you all of a sudden have a guy like Alperen Şengün, you might as well run all the offense through him. So that, I guess that's kind of my point with him. Let's see who else we got. We'll just keep going down the list of scorers. We'll skip on Fred VanVleet because he's Fred VanVleet. Not that sounded kind of rude or almost, but just like he's on the wrong side of 30. Not too much to talk about with his development. Like he's just gonna keep being Fred VanVleet. Low field goal percentage, high threes, high steals, good assists, solid player. Whether that's in Houston or elsewhere. Amen Thompson, as I said, talk about a superstar. This was, I think, Houston's most valuable pick over the last 5 years. Amen Thompson. Oof. That was because of my voice, not because of Amen Thompson, but I guess it kind of fits too. 14.1 points, 8.2 rebounds, 3.8 assists, 1.4 steals, 1.3 blocks, 32.2 minutes per game. Started 2/3 of the year, almost a little less. Jabari Smith doesn't get hurt, and we potentially don't see Amen Thompson slide into the starting lineup and like fully take the reins as a permanent starter the way he did. But yeah, this guy's a superstar. I would almost go ahead and make him a lock for the All-Star game next year. Let me verify this. Did he make all defense? I'll pull that up as I'm talking about him. Yeah, he was all defensive first team. So in year 2, all defensive first team. While not even starting not most of the year, for part of the year. Unreal defender. Victor Wembanyama is probably going to be defensive player of the year as long as he plays enough games for like the next decade plus. But Amen Thompson's going to be an all defensive first team player for the next decade plus. Very consistent player. That could be an all NBA guy as well. Um, the thing with both him and his brother is the jump shot. It's going to be the difference between Asar as well, having that upside, but specifically for Amen, because we've already seen it, the difference between him being like a top 20, 25 player in the league and being like a top 10 plus player in the league. And I think he still even has top 10 upside, even if he doesn't figure out the jumper. But maybe the difference between him being like a top 15 guy and a top 5 guy is the jump shot. And that doesn't mean that he needs to become a 40% 3-point shooter. It doesn't mean that he needs to hit 2.5 threes per game. Just to not be a liability. Not to have such a clear, glaring weakness in his game, which would be the jump shot, that defenses can't simply like not close out or just help off him dramatically to clog driving lanes or to like help on other players. That's going to be huge for him. If you can get to a point where he's a 33% 3-point shooter and taking 3 of them per game means hitting 1, it opens up the world for this entire offense. And then using him in other ways, which he had success on offense even without that this year. And just continuing to be dynamic with him as a cutter, as a screener, putting the ball in his hands. The other thing with him is that we saw him play point guard some, but he is a player that I think can be a point guard, but Fred VanVleet's still there. So maybe it doesn't happen for a couple more seasons. Maybe it's just one more season. Fred VanVleet has 1 year left on his contract. Maybe Fred VanVleet becomes, or excuse me, Amen Thompson becomes the point guard after Fred VanVleet is gone. Could he get up to 6, 7 assists per game? Potentially. We could be looking at like a 18, 9, and 7 guy with 2 steals and 2 blocks. Like that's probably peak, but it's a possibility for this guy. I mean, you value him as a top 15 at least Dynasty player, potentially higher, and I think he can continue to improve on his value. I think, as I said, the player that you'd have to make a pretty special player available for me to consider trading Amen Thompson, and that includes having him in Dynasty leagues as well. Not really looking to trade this guy no matter what happens, no matter who Houston trades for, whether they just keep everyone around. You just don't trade him. It probably won't be long before he's a top 10 player consensus in Dynasty leagues. Straight up superstar and arguably even better in fantasy than he is in real life, which is pretty scary to say considering how good he is in real life. A couple more of the more intriguing guys we still have to talk about. Jabari Smith Jr., who, I don't know, maybe this is just in my eyes, but I know I really don't think I'm alone in this. Jabari Smith Jr. is probably at least part of the reason that certain people are a little lower on Ace Bailey than you would have been 5 years ago. I think we saw Jabari Smith in college, and I think now that just everyone just seems to be getting a little bit more aware of our deficiencies and our quickness to compare players that probably aren't, now that we're looking at it, the best comparisons. I know I wasn't the only one, but I know I thought, oh, Jabari Smith, this guy could be the next Kevin Durant. I see the vision for it. Oh, he's hitting contested mid-range jumpers in college. Yeah, he's Kevin Durant. Who else would he be? Oh, so now that's why we're all doing that with Ace Bailey, where some people are saying, oh, see, guys, he's 6'10". He has defensive upside. He hits these ridiculous shots. You don't call him a shot creator. He's just a tough shot maker, because Ace Bailey / Jabari Smith, they're not really creating these shots for themselves. They're just hitting these tough shots. And I think Jabari Smith is an incredibly valuable NBA player. I think his archetype as a 3-and-D guy, and that's probably even like limiting comparison. Like, he does more than that. Very good defender, can space the floor, has shown to be a good rebounder at times, but I think a 3 and D 4 is what it boils down to. And I think again, 3 and D just kind of almost seems like a demeaning description, but it's not. Um, Incredibly valuable, and I think if he it reaches his peak, then he'll end up being worth that number 3 overall pick. But I think when there was talks of him going number 1 overall to Orlando, the idea and the vision was much higher. So Ace Bailey, you can thank Jabari Smith in my eyes for why you're not a consensus number 2 or number 3 overall player, even though most people still have Ace Bailey at 3. Um, there's a reason there's a lot of pushback from the, I don't know, fantasy community, draft community, dynasty community, everyone. Not everyone is as high on Ace Bailey as you may have been 5 years ago if a player like Ace Bailey came out. It's just interesting. But Jabari Smith this year, worst statistical season as a pro. And I think part of that was the injury. And then part of it was the emergence of Ahmed Thompson that reduced his role after he came back from his injury. 12.2 points, 7 rebounds, 1.1 assists. All those were career lows. 1.7 threes, 43.8% from the floor. Doesn't really get you defensive stats, but make no mistake, he's a good defensive player. Can stay in front of the ball. And I think that's what makes him a valuable player. You don't necessarily see in the box score, but a 6'10 guy that can defend, I'd say probably 1 through 4. Maybe you don't ideally want him guarding ones, but I think he can move his feet well enough to guard point guards in possessions. That can rebound pretty well, doesn't need the ball in his hands a ton. Like, that's valuable. In fantasy, I'm not super optimistic that he's going to become a star, but in real life, I'm pretty confident he's going to be a very good player for a very long time. And yeah, it's kind of where I'm at. I don't think that he's the one that Houston should be looking to trade. I think he fits in well if they are going to, say, in the scenario they get like a Kevin Durant. I think having Jabari Smith on the floor with Kevin Durant at the same time can be valuable. Because again, Jabari Smith doesn't necessarily need the ball in his hands all the time. You can work on giving Kevin Durant the ball, and then Jabari Smith can space the floor, knock down catch and shoot shots, take on more responsibility in defense. It's a good scenario for him. If he is traded, then maybe we do get to see if he can reach that offensive peak that we thought maybe he'd get to when he was drafted. I'm not super optimistic about that, but I think if he's traded, we could potentially see the team that acquires him explore that. If it is in Phoenix, then I think he fits in well with Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, whoever else they end up having on that roster. Ryan Dunn will be there. Ryan Dunn, it'll be interesting to see what that lineup looks like. That's a hypothetical we don't, I guess, have to explore the specifics of, but maybe you see Jabari Smith take on a little bit more responsibility if he is with a new team. But I think for his career, remaining in Houston is a good scenario. I think he fits a lot of things of what they want to do and what they're about. I think his competition for minutes has kind of made this past season a little bit subpar statistically. I guess a fair way to put it. Let's see who else we have here. Tari Eason. Talk about a player that is built to be great in fantasy basketball. 12 points per game, 6.4 rebounds, 1.5 assists. Not the most attractive numbers there, but 1.7 steals, 0.9 blocks, 1.1 threes per game. The injury woes just in years 2 and 3 have been a little concerning. But when he's on the floor, fantasy stud. The combination of, really the defensive production sets him apart from most other players, but can also score pretty well. Hits a 3, rebounds at a decent rate. Like, you see the vision with this guy of him being and I think it's just going to come down to him getting more minutes. 24.9 per game this year was a career high. You get him into 28 minutes per game. I'm not even asking for 34, but 28. You can get closer to 2 steals and a block. Also hitting a 3, rebounding okay. Fits in well with this team. fantasy stud. He's a valuable trade piece for Houston as well, but I think he also is just a player they shouldn't be actively looking to trade because he fits what they want to do so well. Um, the defensive potential for this team over the next 5+ years to have Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Amen Thompson switching on the perimeter, and also Dylan Brooks is still there as well, who's a very good defender. It's very exciting. The difference with Tari Eason versus Jabari Smith is that it works out a little better in fantasy for Tari Eason. He's more of a defensive playmaker, whereas Jabari Smith's just a good on-ball defender. So hopefully we'll see him get more minutes. If there is a consolidation trade that takes 2 or 3 of these young players out of the equation, good for Tari Eason, assuming he stays. And I'm not expecting him to be the one moved if there is a trade that happens. All right. Another guy that was drafted the same year as Amen Thompson, we've talked about him a little bit, it's Cam Whitmore. And I believe that there is some excitement or some optimism about what Cam Whitmore can be, probably both with Rockets fans, but also definitely with Dynasty managers. But I have legit concerns about his fit specifically in Houston. I think he's another guy that could potentially benefit from being traded. And I think it makes sense if Houston is making a trade to have Cam Whitmore be included as an upside piece. Played 16.2 minutes per game this year, 9.4 points, 3 rebounds, 1 assist, 1.3 threes. He can score for sure. And he is an athletic player with some fun dunks. But as a rookie, the 0.7 assists with a turnover per game this past season, he was able to get over or get 2, not even over, 1 assist per game versus 0.9 turnovers. Now, it's not his role to be a playmaker. That's not what Houston needs him to do when they put him in the game. They know that he's there to get buckets. But I think if he's in a different situation, such as Milwaukee, if there was like a Giannis trade, or Phoenix, if there's a Kevin Durant trade, and he's able to play 28 minutes per game, 30 minutes per game, we'll see him take more shots. And I think 2 things will happen. One, the numbers will be better than they were this year. We will see him potentially get to like 20 points per game. I think that is a realistic scenario. I think it's also very real that it will become not a glaring issue, but it will become more prevalent why this guy wasn't playing more. And I think that, like, I don't want to sound too harsh, but like, because he is a very talented basketball player, a very talented scorer, but I think the deficiencies in his game don't necessarily fit with every single team. I think the lack of playmaking, he's not, doing a ton defensively. Like he's there to score. So if he's not scoring, 1, at a high rate, and 2, efficiently, what's he really providing super positive? Now, the pushback here. He will turn 21 years old in July. There is so much time for him to develop, so much time for him to figure that out. I don't think he's going to be able to figure that out with the Rockets. Because when he gets into the game, he's playing 16 minutes per game this year. And yeah, he can help them score, but I think working through things and developing, like, had he been drafted to Houston 2 years before, if he came out 2 years before because he was older, like, obviously it's not something he should have done differently. Like, it's just the way things work out. Drafted to a Houston team that in year 2 was the number 2 seed in the West. So he doesn't have these developmental years that a guy like Jalen Green got to work through these issues, to shoot bad and learn and grow. Like, Houston's more ready to win now. So I think a fresh start for Cam Whitmore to take time to develop will be good for him. But I'm not super high on him in a dynasty league because I don't think he really gives you defensive stats. Don't think he's going to shoot super efficiently. He's not going to give you an assist. Maybe he can get you, got 3 rounds per game this year. Say he's playing 28 minutes per game. Maybe he gets you 5 or 6. Cool. The points there, the threes will be there if he's playing more. Like, those things are, like, there are positives here. but I think overall he doesn't fit phenomenally for a category league. I don't think he fits phenomenally with what Houston's trying to build. So I'm not super optimistic on Cam Whitmore, especially if he stays in Houston. If he is traded, it's a fresh start. I will keep a close eye on him and be rooting for him to develop into a winning basketball player. I just don't think that that's where he's at right now. And I think that even if Houston doesn't make a trade for like a superstar, make the home run swing, get a Giannis, get a KD, if they're trading for someone that is more of a win now piece, I don't think they should hesitate to part with Cam Whitmore. I think he has enough upside for them to get a good player from another team, but I also don't think he fits super well with what they want to do. All right. I think the last player that we'll talk about, because there are other players on this team that are role players or that play a role. Like Fred VanVleet is valuable in redraft leagues. He still holds value in dynasty leagues, but we're going to focus on all of the upside guys that Houston has, including one that was kind of pushed out of the rotation here as a rookie that I think for some reason people still had preseason been talking about this guy's potential rookie of the year. Don't really know why. We loved Reed Shepherd. A lot of dynasty analysts love Reed Shepherd. I think if you're a spreadsheet guy with the numbers, we were so in favor of Reed Shepherd. He went number 1 overall in a lot of my rookie drafts. But the idea was always that, he's going to Houston. He's not going to play much early on, but long term, this guy's still going to be very good. So he averaged 4.4 points, 1.5 rebounds, 1.4 assists, played 12.6 minutes per game. Didn't look all that good when he was out there. Played 52 games, started 3 times. But that was always the plan. He was never going to come in to his Houston team with the way it was built. And maybe that was part of the issue in some people's minds, some people's eyes was, this Houston team that hasn't made the playoffs and since James Harden left. Reed Shepherd will have no problem beating out Jalen Green for minutes. Well, Reed Shepherd was still super young. Like, he'll turn 21 in June. But he had a few games down the stretch of this season that were pretty encouraging. He had in a game against the Thunder, he had 25 points, 5 assists, 2 steals, and a block. And then that was in March. And then in April, he had a 25-4 with 2 steals and 6 threes against the Clippers, 14 3 5 2 1 with 4 threes against the Lakers. And some of these games were, after Houston had already kind of locked up the 2 seeds, so they weren't force feeding the starters all the minutes. So there's not much to take from Reed Shepherd's rookie year other than we still know what he was when he came out of college, and that was a player that could do a number of different things offensively, could shoot, could play make okay, could defend. And all the advanced stats were really in favor of him. And now next year, I think from what I remember either reading or seeing, I don't remember exactly what it was, so I don't want to cite anything or use quotes, but the idea would be for him to be more part of the rotation next season. He basically got a red shirt year. That's okay. It's a good thing for his long-term development. Now I think we'll see him have a really good year 2. And again, still one of the most valuable players in this class, the 2024 class for Dynasty. But the expectation was never that he was going to come in and just dominate from the jump. It was never our expectation. I think maybe there was hope for it, or you could talk about there's a path for it. Like, this, like Jalen Green, who we've already talked about, the same issues that Jalen Green that we talked about this episode, were the same exact things we were talking about last year. So there was a path for Reed Shepherd to take on that role. Didn't see it, but that's okay. Still love Reed Shepherd, still super high on him. Excited to see what he does in year 2. That's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast. And excuse me. Still getting over being sick. I know everyone was expecting Matt to be here because it's a Tuesday. He had something come up with work, so we are going to just circle it back Tomorrow will be the Matt Lawson episode. It'll be a Matt Lawson Wednesday, but it will be here. And we're going to continue with our mock draft, hit the next 24 players, probably end up doing that for a few weeks to break all these guys down, give you our thoughts, to hopefully give you a, maybe not perfect, but a pretty good top 96 Dynasty rankings. But as I'm losing my voice, I'm going to go ahead and just say we're wrapping up this episode. You can like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And I will see you tomorrow.